Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining this session. My name is Rakesh, and I will be the host for this webinar today. Before we begin, just a couple of points. All of you participants will be on mute during the course of this session. If you have any questions at all, and I love questions, so feel free to use the side panel on the left-hand side. You'll see an option for Q&A. You can use that or the chat window to post your questions, and I will get to those questions towards the end of this session. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. We have a very important and interesting topic today, and my topic by itself is a question that a lot of organizations are wondering about. Is your IT team ready for a hybrid work model? Now, as confidence in the effectiveness of vaccinations build and restrictions on social gatherings ease around the world, several organizations are mulling over the idea of letting their employees return to the workplace. Now, though it may take a longer time to witness pre-pandemic occupancy levels in our office buildings, it seems increasingly closer to the horizon day by day. So we're set to observe a variety of reopening strategies at play, which will be largely defined also by the type of industry that you belong to. While companies in the manufacturing sector that rely on physical labor go for full occupancy levels, or at least close to full occupancy levels, a major section of the industry is expected to start and continue with a hybrid model. A hybrid model is where you combine remote work with on and off time in the office. Now, in the case of the US specifically, 52% of employees said they would like their organization to adopt more flexible hybrid work models as per the recent research done by McKinsey. Current company cultures tend to favor employees who work on site, and the skills required to lead in a face-to-face setup may not always be the same in a remote or a hybrid work model. Now that employees have tasted the advantages of remote work for a long period of time, it's kind of hard to accept an entirely on-site working model, given that they have seen how much time and resources are saved by working from home. Now, don't get me wrong, there are quite a few disadvantages to um, working from home as well. It's not all a bed of roses, but working from home does have its advantages. So there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides. That is with remote work as well as on-site work. So for that specific reason, a lot of companies tend to choose to go with a hybrid work model. And IT teams played a pivotal role in enabling remote work and will similarly have a central part in facilitating hybrid work also. While the shift to remote work happened almost overnight, returning to work or setting up a hybrid work environment will be a gradual process, with hybrid work being the norm for the future, or at least that is what it looks like from where we stand today. Now, IT teams can expect this transition to be more challenging than the last due to a wide variety or range of aspects to which they have to pay attention. So during this webinar, we'll be covering how IT teams can prepare and fine-tune processes to accommodate a hybrid work environment. So these are some of the key questions that we will be answering during the course of this session. What can IT teams expect in terms of the volume of requests that are coming into the help desk? Where do the SLAs that we've configured earlier, do they still hold good in the current situation? And we're also going to look at this new concept of what an on-site worker bias is and why it's important for IT teams to track it. And we're also going to look at certain aspects around security, specifically endpoint security, and how you can assign risk factors to your endpoints and your IT assets to help you mitigate security breaches when you are in a hybrid work mode. And finally, we're also going to look at how a hybrid work dashboard can aid IT operations. All right, so with that, precursor, let's get started with our first aspect or the first scenario that we're going to look at. One of the most fundamental things to judge in a pandemic forced hybrid work setup is forecasting the number of people working from home and working on site, because on site work is not a mandate, rather left to the employee's choice in the present scenario. And this really directly has an impact on the volume of help desk incidents, because the way you deal with requests from remote employees is quite different from how you deal with um, employees working out of your physical offices. So, because dealing with requests from remote employees may take more time due to logistical obstacles as a result of the physical distance. And on the other hand, dealing with on-site requests means dealing with employees in person who demand immediate solutions to their issues. So there is, though the request might be similar, the dynamics are quite different. And also, another aspect to consider is that infrastructure related on site incidents may have a bigger impact, as it might affect other employees who are working out of your physical locations as well. And along with that, another interesting dynamic that people tend to overlook is that on-site employees tend to raise requests during regular work hours, whereas remote workers or employees who are working from remote locations with flexible work hours may not follow the same pattern, because they might tend to structure their work based on how their day progresses. So, understanding this incident generation pattern and how it works in your organization will be essential to plan technician availability throughout the course of the day. So, let's start with one aspect at a time, starting with how does one anticipate or gauge the incident volume that is coming in to your help desk in a hybrid work model. Now, one approach to gauge incident volume is to compare the incident volume from pre-pandemic levels, when most of the employees were on site, with the incident volumes during the pandemic, which saw majority of workers working, or majority of employees working remotely. So let's look at a report that will help us compare the pre-pandemic versus the post-pandemic volume. Right. So throughout the course of this webinar, I'm going to be using analytics that are built using our IT analytics software from Manage Engine, that is Analytics Plus. So for those of you who are new to Analytics Plus, it's a business intelligence and analytics software specifically tuned for IT tools and IT audience. And it offers out-of-the-box integrations with popular IT tools, a lot of tools under the Manage Engine suite of product that includes Service Desk Plus, Desktop Central, our desktop management software, Op Manager, Applications Manager, and beyond that, we also offer integrations with third-party IT tools such as ServiceNow, Jira software, and much more. And Analytics Plus connects to these data sources and offers out of the box analytics that you see on my screen here. So in addition to doing the integration or letting you do the integration, it also gives a lot of out-of-the-box reports and does most of the heavy lifting for you so that you don't have to build reports from scratch. In addition to offering out-of-the-box analytics for specific products, it also helps you blend data across different IT tools. So you might be using one software, unless you might be using another software for your network monitoring. Analytics Plus can connect to both these applications and bring the data and also combine the data by looking for specific common parameters that are similar or that are related between the two IT tools. All right, so that's a quick introduction of Analytics Plus. So getting back to our scenario, which requires us to compare the pre-pandemic and present incident volume. So I have a pre-built report here, which does exactly that. Now this compares the number of requests that came into the help desk across 3 years, that is 2019, 2020, and 2021. 2019 was the year before the pandemic. So this report helps us compare the number of requests that came in during each year, and it does a comparison month on month. So for example, if you look at this section, which is January, the report compares the incoming requests that came in January in 2019, 20, and 21. And this is really important when you're analyzing trends. You'll also have to account for seasonal variations. Sometimes, a good example, let's say, is during holiday season, you don't really get a lot of requests coming into your help desk. So around the month of December and November, things are pretty slow. So you can't really compare that incident volume with that of January or February because it's going to be quite drastically different. So this report takes care of that seasonal variations or accounts for that seasonal variations and gives you a proper and a fair comparison of the request volumes across time periods. So if you look at this report, it's pretty obvious that my incident volumes have increased in 2020 by a certain degree and by a decent amount more in 2021. So my present request volume is definitely higher than what it was before the pandemic. So that gives me a perspective of where I stand today. So the next thing I need to do is to come up with prediction on how much I can expect or how many requests I can expect to come in the next few months. So a good approach would be to take an average of the two, that is pre and post pandemic, to give you an indicative figure of the volume that one can expect when you start with your hybrid work environment. And Analytics Plus can forecast incident volumes using this baseline. So I'm going to pull up this post-pandemic forecast report. And what this does is it uses the average of the pre and post-pandemic request volumes. And in addition to that, it does a prediction of what you can expect in the next few months using that data as the baseline. So up until this is the actual data, and beyond that, what you see here is the prediction that Analytics Plus does on its own. So Analytics Plus is bundled with forecasting algorithms. It learns your data and comes up with forecasts and predictions on how your data will progress over a period of time. And the outer boundaries that you see is the margin by which the prediction can vary. So depending on the confidence level that you set for your prediction, Analytics Plus does the forecasting and also gives you the upper and lower limit between which your actual volume can vary. And this is really helpful if you're looking to get uh, a sense of how much your incident volume is set to increase. Now, and also, this is really helpful if you're also an IT manager or a help desk manager who's trying to decide if you need to acquire additional help desk staff to accommodate or to deal with the increase or decrease in request volume. Now, one aspect that you also have to be aware of is the fact that this forecast is built on the current ratio of on-site to remote workers or remote employees. Like I mentioned earlier, this ratio can fluctuate over time and shift over time because as the situation with the pandemic develops, you can either expect more employees to come into the office or lesser portion of your employees to come into the office. So wouldn't it be great if your prediction model could account for changes in this ratio? Analytics Plus has an answer for that, and the recently released feature, which is called the Whatif analysis, helps you run situations or scenarios like this, and it lets you adjust your prediction based on the varying level of on-site workers. So I'll quickly pull that report, which I'm calling impact of on-site presence. Let me explain this report a little bit before I talk about how the what if scenarios work. Now, this report gives me the number of incoming requests coming in from various sites and of various priority levels. Now, this uh, information or this prediction is based on the assumption that your office occupancy is going to be between 50 and 90%. Now, let's say 2 to 3 months from now, there is more confidence with people more confidence in people coming to the office, your office occupancy levels could increase. So you can easily account for that using this prediction model. So let's say your office occupancy increases to about 70 to 90%. You just type in the new percentage here and you get a prediction of the total number of incoming requests that you can run. And this is a very useful feature that you can use to run predictions on or scenarios on various items. So let's say you can run a prediction on how your SLA compliance will be affected if you add or remove a few help desk technicians from your workforce. And that really opens up a lot of areas where you can use past data to make decisions before you actually, let's say, go in and hire new people to bring your SLA under control. And so that's about predicting incident volumes. And one last aspect while we discuss incident volume is the inflow pattern during the course of the day. And this is one aspect that a lot of tend to miss because during a full on-site mode, your request pattern during the course of the day could look something like this. Let me pull that up. So because your employees who are working on site typically stick to, let's say, a 9 to 5 schedule, your pattern is going to look something like this. You're going to see a lot of requests coming in between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. and there will be a few who tend to, tend to work late. So you might see a few requests coming in past 6 p.m. But majority of your cluster is going to be between the 9 to 5 or the 9 to 6 time frame. But this is going to be quite different when you have a lot of people working from home. And understanding this pattern for your organization and how it looks for your organization during the hybrid work will be essential to plan your help desk workflow. So I can quickly switch to the number of or the pattern of requests that are coming in from remote employees. And it's going to look something like this. So you're going to have requests coming in as early as 8 a.m. And also as late as 9 p.m. or 11 p.m. because employees tend to structure their working hours differently when they are working out of their homes, right? So a couple of things you can gather from this report to make decisions is look at what time of the day, I'm going back to onsite. So look at what time of the day majority of your requests come in. So in my situation or in my example here, most of the requests come in between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. And this is useful information if I was a help desk manager to ensure I have majority of my technicians stationed at work to around this time to deal with the higher influx of requests. And also, another aspect you can use this report for is to look at priority-wise distribution throughout the course of the day. So I'm going to quickly add priority to segment this graph here. Um, and this is, by the way, this is the drag and drop interface that helps you create reports. All you need to do is just drag and drop fields from your available, uh, your available. Let me just fix this. Right, from your available list of fields, and it helps you build the report for you. And we also have an Ask Zia feature, which is our AI assistant, which is powered by machine learning and natural language processing. You don't even have to know which field to drag and drop in the X or the Y axis. All you need to do is ask a question like, show me the incoming request volume throughout the course of the day, and Zia can interpret what you're asking and show you a report that that answers your question in the form of a report, right? All right, so now I've added priority as a dimension in this report, and here you can see majority of your high priority incidents are coming in between 1 a.m. and 4 p.m. And this is useful information for a help desk manager so that they can ensure they have more experienced technicians stationed or made available during these timeframes to meet with uh, meet with the higher priority incidents that are coming in to the help desk. So this is a really useful report. Again, this report is going to look differently depending on your company and how your workforce schedules their work timings. All right. So we discussed a lot about anticipating incident volume, and these are the key takeaways. In order to come up with a prediction of what your request volume is going to look like during a hybrid work scenario, one approach that I would suggest is take an average of request trends that you observed during on-site and remote work, and that will help you come up with a proper or an accurate prediction of incident volume, or also modify or adjust your technician work schedule so that they are in line with the patterns that you're observing. And finally, use tools like Analytics Plus to run what-if scenarios to accommodate for changing levels of on-site and remote employees, right? So incident volume prediction involves all of these main aspects. And when we talk about incidents, we can't really not talk about SLAs because that is one of the major aspects of incident or request management. Now, the time it takes to accomplish our daily tasks has close correlation with our physical location. And all of us at some level might have experienced this when remote work started. While some tasks that required collaboration with our colleagues took longer, tasks that require less collaboration and more focus could be established or finished quickly. Now, we have to think of SLAs the same way um, because requests such as software installation, for example, that took almost no time when employees were on site. You could just like walk up to their workstation and install the software. Takes longer when they are working remotely. So unless you have, of course, an endpoint management system that could deliver applications or software remotely, even that takes a little bit of time for the deployment to happen. So the point is, it doesn't really happen immediately, and that could have an effect on your SLAs. And due to this aspect, SLAs configured with on-site work predominantly in mind should be reconsidered in a hybrid work setup. Otherwise, you risk the chance of holding technicians accountable for SLA violations, which may be difficult to adhere to, and it could also end up demoralizing them, right? So watch your SLA compliance trends, and a good way to do that is using a compliance trend report. Let me pull that up. Right. So this report here gives you an idea of the SLA compliance over a period of time. Now, for a while, just ignore the red lines. I'll get to that in a little bit, and concentrate on the blue sections of this report, which shows us the variation in SLA compliance over a period of time. So, for example, in Q4 of 2018, my SLA compliance was 90%, which means 9 out of 10 requests that came into the help desk were resolved before the SLA got violated. Whereas in Q1 or the beginning of Q1 or from the beginning of Q1 2020, my SLA's compliance or SLA compliance has deteriorated, and it was at about 78% in Q3 of 2020, which means only about 8 out of or 7.8 out of 10 requests were resolved before the SLAs got violated, right? So in my case, there is a drastic decrease in the SLA compliance volumes, and it's not very easy to make out. But in a real-time situation, your SLA deviations or your SLA compliance might not drop by a factor of 10% that soon. So that is where trend lines really help. And that is what you see in the middle. This red line represents the actual trend. And this trend line helps you sort of remove the effect of small variations and help you tell if your your trend has either gone up or gone down, and it does that with an upper and a lower limit, similar to what we saw um, with our previous forecasting example as well. So trend lines are really useful, especially when you have a lot of minor variations that you may miss when you're looking at your data, but this trend line sort of look past, it looks past all that and tells you if your trend is either on the increase or on the decrease, right? So that is this is a good report. This is something that I always advocate to employees to use in order to track their SLA compliance. And if you wish to go a little more in depth into analyzing your SLA deviation, the SLA deviation report can help you do that. And this is also another interesting report that helps you analyze by what degree your SLAs are outside of their normal range. Now, let me explain this report a little bit. We'll take high priority, for example. So this report tells me that it takes me about 3 hours to, on average, for my help desk to resolve a high priority incident, whereas the actual SLA that has been set is at about 1 hour. Now, that's a huge variation. And if this is the normal time it takes for your technicians to resolve high priority incidents, setting a 1 hour SLA is not really realistic, right? So this is an example of a situation where you may have to consider reconfiguring your SLAs because the deviation is quite high. Now, you could argue that this variation is probably caused by a few outliers or by only a few technicians. Now, the best way to clarify if that is what is happening is by drilling down into this report by technician, and you'll see the time it takes for individual technicians to resolve a high priority incident. And if you look at this report across the board, everybody's almost taking more than 2.5 hours to resolve a high priority incident. And this instantly helps you clear that doubt of whether this is an outlier or if it is the actual trend that you're observing in your help desk. So that way, your SLA deviation report is very helpful, and it helps you do the same kind of comparison with other priority of incidents as well, and gives you a visual representation of the degree to which or degree by which deviation is happening. A larger deviation could mean your SLAs are in need of serious reconsideration. And in case you're just setting out on accommodating a hybrid work environment, a good practice would be to set your SLA targets at about, I would say, 20% above the current average. And this will give your technicians a realistic figure to adhere to and give you also some time for observation, after which your SLAs can evolve. Right. So SLAs are a key factor when it comes to incident management in the hybrid environment. So make sure you compare your pre-pandemic and present SLA compliance trends. That will give you an estimation on where your SLA stands in comparison to the past. Pay attention to the degree by which deviations are happening when it comes to SLA compliance. And especially when it comes to physical asset delivery or service requests that have to do with physical asset delivery, take into account the logistics as well, because sometimes, depending on where your employees are, it might take that much longer for them to receive an IT asset. So ensure you factor that in as well when you come up with service delivery SLAs, because that will set the right expectation for your end users while they request for IT hardware. All right. So those are a few things that you have to ensure, pay attention to when it comes to incident SLAs. And the next concept that I'm going to talk about is pretty interesting, and I would say it's more of a recent development, and we're calling it on-site worker bias. Now, as your IT teams get accustomed to supporting a hybrid workforce, they could start showing bias towards employees that are predominantly on-site. In comparison, resolving requests of on-site employees are much faster as opposed to the ones working remotely. As IT technicians realize this aspect, they could subconsciously start prioritizing requests coming from on-site employees because it allows them to check more items off their list a lot quicker. Now, this might sound like it's not that big of an issue initially, but if left unchecked, this practice could build up to a less pleasing work experience for remote employees. Now, a good way to keep tabs on this is by comparing the time technicians take to pick up requests from on-site and remote workers. So this will sort of give you a first line of indication of the onset of this bias. So I have a report that compares this specific aspect. So I have two metrics here. Let's not worry about the first response time to start with. We'll only look at average assignment time. So when you look at this report, you can see that a request gets assigned to a technician in about 12 minutes, and it's coming from an on-site employee, whereas a request coming in from a remote employee takes about 20 minutes for a technician to pick it up. And on average, that is a decent deviation or a difference, because that's almost 8 minutes on average that is more when a request comes from a remote or an employee who's working remotely. Now, this could be an indication that your technicians are preferring to work with employees who are on site. Now, you could go a little deeper and analyze the response time of such requests to look for things like lethargy from setting into your technicians, especially when it comes to remote workers. And this could point to the fact that they might be picking up requests but not really getting to them after they realize that your employee is not working from the office. So here again, we see a similar trend. The first response for an on-site employee happens in the first 19 minutes, whereas for a remote employee it takes about 27 minutes. And that validates the first metric that we looked at, which was the assignment time. And a combination of this can help you gauge whether on-site bias is setting in. And if there is a noticeable difference in how requests from on-site and off-site incidents are dealt with, it needs to be addressed in the initial stages. Now, I've come up with this report by introducing additional fields in my request form. So you'll need to find ways to categorize requests based on geographical proximity of technicians to the end users, for you to come up with an analysis like this, because that information creates the base of where this information is being pulled from. And one other place where you can pull that information could also be from your HR systems. You can plug your Analytics Plus software to HR systems, which hold information on whether an employee is working from one of your physical offices or from a remote location. And you can use that information to do an analysis like this to analyze if there is, or to analyze if your technicians are showing some bias towards on-site employees, right? So the key takeaways from this section is for you to ensure that you look for the telltale signs of this bias setting in, and you could do that by looking at the first response time and the pickup time. And a higher assignment and a pickup time could point to hesitancy in picking up requests from remote users. And also sometimes higher first response time could mean that your technicians are procrastinating before they start working on those particular requests. Right. So we've covered a few situations when it comes to managing your help desk. Now we'll look at a few points where we talk about how you can ensure security, especially with your endpoints. And with most of your endpoints connecting between home and corporate network on and off, your chances of a breach increase. And it is very essential for you to perform a pre-check before allowing devices from accessing sensitive sections of your network or server infrastructure. Now, my recommendation is to classify your endpoints into two separate sections, those that have passed a pre-check and those that are yet to do so. Now, endpoints that have passed the pre-check can be allowed to access sections of your network that hold sensitive corporate data. Now, it's up to you to define what parameters that you're going to check as part of this initial pre-check. But my recommendation would be to look for the presence of critical patches. If critical patches are present, your endpoints have a decent amount of protection against latest malware. And the next point to look at is the antivirus status, if it is available, enabled, and up to date, right? Because security patches and antivirus applications are the first line of defense against malicious attacks. Now, with remote work becoming the norm, the percentage of endpoints falling prey to external attacks have soared, and estimates show that there were as many as 192,000 coronavirus-related cyber attacks per week in May of 2020 alone, and that is quite a lot. And that was an increase of about 30% compared to the previous month, which was April 2020. And this is based on research done by Unisys. Now, those are staggering numbers. So security needs to be of prime importance when we are facilitating a hybrid work environment. While there are various angles on how one can look at while trying to judge an organization's patch deployment posture, a good place to start is by looking at the distribution of endpoints that are missing critical patches. Now, I'll pull up this report. What I've done with this report or with this metric here is I've categorized endpoints as safe, approach with caution, and risky based on whether they have those critical patches or if they're missing critical patches. So the condition that I come up with is if they're missing more than 10 critical patches, then I categorize it as approach with caution. If it is more than 10, I categorize it as risky. And if an endpoint has all patches up to date, then I categorize it as safe. Now, the formula engine in Analytics Plus lets me assign a weightage based on the number of missing patches, and you can apply this logic to any other parameter that you pick, and it can also be a combination of parameters which you can use to assign a tag to your endpoint. And looking at this report, you can see that almost 50% of my endpoints are categorized as risky, right? And that really sets the stage for how you're going to approach this issue of ensuring pre-checks are done and ensuring the security of your endpoints. Now, once you have the risk factor established, you can then create a branch-wise report which looks at the risk factor by location, right? Because when you have multiple locations, you might have one or two locations which are more vulnerable as a result of majority of the workstations that belong to that location not having critical patches. For example, Brisbane here is top of the list, and I can see almost 58% of endpoints belonging to this location do not have or are missing critical patches, whereas in contrast, Vancouver is at a better stage with only 21% of workstations missing critical patches. So to get your approach and sort of strategically uh, get your action plan in place, this report is really helpful. I would start with the most vulnerable locations and work my way towards the rest of the locations. That way, I mitigate the endpoints with the highest risk first before getting to the other endpoints. Now, IT admins can dig deeper into the magnitude of this problem by also looking at the age of missing patches. And this is really interesting because this really tells you or gives you an idea of how long this situation had been continuing. For example, if you look at this section of the report, it tells me almost 174 patches which are missing, and they have been missing for about 150 days. Now, what that means is uh, it's been 150 days since these 174 patches have had been released and they're yet to be applied to your endpoints. And that really gives you more perspective on how your patch deployments are working across your organization. So start with assigning a risk factor to your endpoints. Look at what percentage of your endpoints make the risky sections. Look at the same report location-wise, and also look at the missing patches by their release time frame. And all of these three put together will not only give you perspective on how bad things are, but also gives you a starting point from where you can approach um, your plan of attack, basically. And I also mentioned antivirus. That is also another important um, area to look into because an endpoint running an outdated antivirus software is as good as one that does not have an antivirus installed at all. Because if it doesn't have updated binaries, it's as good as not being protected at all. So this is another important aspect that you have to look at. And all of this data that I talked about with respect to endpoints is coming from Desktop Central, which is our endpoint management software. Analytics Plus offers integration with Desktop Central with all modules. You can look at software deployment, patch deployment, and analytics on all of those modules, and combine that data um, with, let's say, help desk data from or incident data from help desk such as service desk plus, and that really gives you um, uh, an idea of how security affects your incidents and also how incidents or how incident load affects your security posture, right? Um, so those are the things that you have to pay attention to when you're dealing with your endpoints. Ensure that you have a good system through which you're running pre-checks. Use those pre-checks to assign scores to your endpoints. So in addition to just tagging your workstations as risky, you can also assign scores based on uh, factors like the um, number of critical patches it's missing, and also the number of days since the antivirus was updated, right? And the next thing to do is set up defined protocols as to what you're going to do when you detect such endpoints. That is going to give you a defined plan as to how you're going to mitigate risks in your IT infrastructure. All right, so let's move on to the next section of this topic of how you can adapt to a hybrid work model. And this particular point that I'm going to talk about is also it has to do with how to deal with endpoints and security. Now, we talked about how to prevent an attack, but now we're going to look at what you can do in case a critical vulnerability is detected. Now, in the event that a critical vulnerability is detected on a user's workstation or a mobile phone, it is likely that all the other devices associated with the user are also exposed to the same vulnerability. And this is especially common in a situation where majority of users are working remotely. A user entity relationship report can help quickly identify all devices owned by a particular user. Now, this report is built by using or combining data from Service Desk Plus and Desktop Central. So from Desktop Central, we can identify the list of users who have a security compromise that was detected on their endpoint, and your Service Desk Plus application has information on what are the other devices that the same user uses. So you can combine that data and you can get a report like this, which tells you who the compromised users are, what are the different devices that they're using, and also the time period for which they've been using this or these resources. Now, the first thing to do here is block all the devices that these users own from connecting to your corporate network. Components such as USB and network ports that will allow users to connect to the corporate network will have to be disabled until the devices are scanned for vulnerabilities, right? So that is the first obvious thing to do, and this report can really help you map the various devices belonging to a certain user and get to or and that can help you expedite blocking these devices from connecting to your corporate network. That way, mitigate risks. And also, it's a good practice to periodically review software installation history on infected devices, because these infected devices, they carry unusual or unintended software that could have served as the gateway for infection. That information is useful for you to deem that software as prohibited so that it shows up in your list faster, and also your endpoint management system can prevent those software from getting installed even before it makes it to your application. So this is a unified audit history. This not only shows you the list of software installs and uninstalls, it also um, combines data on ownership changes that happen for a particular asset. It also looks at asset state changes, any manual changes that were done to an asset, and also hardware changes that happen as part of the software. So this is sort of like a go-to report for all things that have to do with audit because it combines data from hardware, software, manual changes, ownership changes, and also asset state changes. So this is a really useful report to have. And again, is built by combining data from several service desk modules. For those of you who use Manage Engine Service Desk Plus, you know this report is only available individually. That is in Service Desk Plus, where you have a set of you have one report where you can look at all the software installations or uninstallations, and you have a hardware report that shows you all the hardware modifications. And obviously, you need separate reports for asset state change and ownership change as well. But this report here combines all of that into a um, single report and makes it available to you in a single view. Right. So that is how you deal with security incidents so that you mitigate the risk and stop it from spreading to other users. So use the ownership history to identify assets that are in possession of a particular compromised user. And also, another approach you could take is assign a higher risk score to users. So this is similar to assigning risk score to an endpoint. You can assign a risk score to users and keep them in close watch, basically. And also have the practice of tracking hardware and software audit changes on security compromised devices. And that could help you identify emerging risks and prepare yourself better by mitigating risks before that happens. So we talked about how you can the things that you can put in place in your help desk, things you can put in place when it comes to endpoint security and management. Now, a good way to prepare for hybrid work is to set up a hybrid work dashboard that helps you follow hybrid work as and when it evolves, because it's new to most organizations. This is a path that we are taking for the first time, though there are organizations who were following this as a practice for a long time. But for the majority of us, hybrid work is something new. And the hybrid work dashboard can really be helpful. So we've identified a key set of metrics, which I'll pull up. I'll just pull up this hybrid work dashboard. So what I've done is I've identified a key set of metrics and best practices that organizations should keep in mind while getting their hybrid work game plan in place. And these metrics may vary in their level of importance from one organization um, to the other. However, metrics are only as effective as how they're put to use, right? And as organizations progress through supporting either a full-fledged work from home model or a hybrid one, it's important that IT admins keep track of all these important metrics. And so a hybrid work dashboard can collate KPIs in a single pane of glass, helping IT teams keep track of progress and perform course correction when needed. So applications like that specialize in IT analytics, such as Analytics Plus, can not only offer metrics discussed in this webinar out of the box, but also help IT teams build customizable hybrid dashboards for organization-wide visibility. So I've put in metrics that I thought would be useful for any organization that starts on their hybrid work journey. So starting with the number of employees on site, the number of users connecting to the VPN, antivirus coverage, and so on. And this is an interesting report that compares the trend of on-site and remote employees. And like I mentioned, you can plug Analytics Plus to your HR systems, which track location of employees and use that information to build reports like this. And VPN is an important, I would say, infrastructure that IT teams have to ensure um, work as expected, because a lot of remote employees depend on VPN access to connect to resources on the office network. And as you can see, the VPN usage is going to continue to increase. And this report helps plan for additional bandwidth or resources to support the VPN infrastructure as needed. And keep an eye on your technicians. Keep an eye on how much load they're taking in, because hybrid work is quite new and it takes time for all of us to adapt to it. So technician load here is calculated based on the number of requests assigned to a technician divided by the amount of time it takes, or the amount of time they have available to resolve the request. So this helps you, or this gives you a good idea of how much load your technicians are taking. So take care of your IT technicians, because they will be exposed to a lot of new dynamics in this hybrid work environment. Keep track of device contact time frame. So if you have an endpoint management system, ensure that your devices are frequently contacting these devices. I'm sorry, contacting your endpoint management system so that it receives the updates, both security and configuration updates that are that you have identified as being important for your security. And finally, all of this is going to be coming down to facilitating employees' work and ensuring that they are satisfied. So keep track of the various factors that affect satisfaction scores. Ensure that your request reopens are under control and request escalations are under control and SLA violations are under control because those affect your employees' satisfaction directly. And I've added that into this dashboard. And also, this is one of my favorite reports because this correlates technician reassignment with the average satisfaction score. So usually what happens is request gets when a request gets passed on from one technician to the other, the employee has to almost feels like he has to start from scratch in explaining his problem, and that directly has an effect on their experience. And this report helps you track that and see how much of an effect it has on your employee. All right. So the key takeaway here is, build a hybrid work dashboard that you feel is more appropriate to your organization and work environment. You can use the examples or the dashboard that I built as an example to develop your own dashboards as well and track those metrics closely. Like I mentioned earlier, getting the metrics is one thing, and putting them to use is another whole other thing. So ensure these metrics are used to take actionable decisions. Also, hybrid work is evolving, so ensure that you track these metrics to quickly adapt to the changing conditions. And like I mentioned, all of the analytics and reports that I talked about were built using Analytics Plus, our IT analytics software from Manage Engine. Analytics Plus connects out of the box with several popular IT tools and gives you out of the box reports. It can give you analytics on help desk processes, endpoint vulnerabilities, network performance, and more. And it uses augmented analytics in predicting and forecasting trends. It also uses natural language processing and machine learning to understand your data, understand your questions, and also offer reports that answer those questions in real time. And you can set up thresholds for specific metrics, like let's say SLA compliance. Let's say you want to be notified when your average SLA compliance goes below 70%. You can set up alerts for that and get notified when those when those thresholds are breached. And Analytics Plus also helps you take snapshots of your IT operations, and that feature by itself is called snapshots. And what it does is it takes a snapshot of, let's say, your help desk performance on, let's say, 1st of January 2020, and you can use that snapshot to compare the status of your help desk 1 year from then or 6 months from then. And that can help you in comparing a lot of metrics and see if you improved in metrics that are important to you. And I talked about data blending quite a bit. You can combine data from multiple tools into a single location and bring all of that together using Analytics Plus. And of course, these analytics can be embedded in your internet portals. You can publish it in your websites and make it available for a larger audience. And these are some of the out-of-the-box integrations that I've tried to list here. Most of the Manage Engine products that you use are already available as integrations in Analytics Plus, and we're also adding a lot of third-party tools like ServiceNow, Jira Software, and Zendesk, and you'll see a lot more in the coming future. So in addition to just integrating, we also offer content packs, which include a default set of 100 plus or 200 plus reports which do the heavy lifting for you so that you don't have to start from scratch when you're going about building your analysis. Right. So if you're interested in downloading Analytics Plus, you can use the QR code flashing on your screen to start off a free 30-day trial. Right. So that brings me to the end of what I want to cover as part of this webinar. Um, I'm going to start taking questions. If you've not put in your question yet, please use the Q&A panel on the left-hand side of your screen to post your questions. Right, so the first question I have here is, how does Analytics Plus blend data from different tools? So yeah, that's a very interesting and important question. So as and when you import data from, let's say, two tools, let's take a help desk and an endpoint management solution, for example. Analytics Plus looks for common aspects or common data points in both these applications. In the case of a help desk, you might have asset information and incident information, whereas from an endpoint system, you have asset information or endpoint information and the patch information, right? So here, the common data point is your asset. An asset can be a Windows workstation or a Linux workstation. Analytics Plus studies your data to find matching data points and asks you if you want to link those two data sources using those data points. After you go pick that or go ahead with that suggestion, Analytics Plus links both these data sets and also runs automatic reports on top of them. So you have the flexibility to pick how you want to combine data from these different tools, but Analytics Plus does that initial first line of combination where it suggests um, linkage using a specific common data point. Right. So the next question that I have is, in what areas does Analytics Plus employ artificial intelligence? Couple of areas where we use AI quite a bit. One is while generating data. So like I mentioned, we have a AI assistant called Zia in the application, which can interpret your questions. You can ask questions like, show me the SLA compliance for the last 12 months. Zia can understand what you're asking. It can, since it has already analyzed your data, it can go in and like fetch data points, answer that question directly and offer reports or answer that question in the form of the report that you're looking for. And another area where we employ AI is our forecasting models. Now we have four different forecasting models. We use AI to understand your data better and suggest or auto pick the forecasting model that will work for your data set. And so that is the second major area where we use artificial intelligence. So when you look at an analytics software, there are three major components or three major things that you do. One is analytics creation or report creation. The second is analyzing that data. And the two examples that I talked about is where we are using AI in the creation part. And as part of our 5.0 release that we did, we introduced this feature called Zia Insights, which can do the second part, that is interpreting your data as well. So if you have a report that you build, the AI assistant, which is Zia, can help interpret the data without you having to do that also. So it can look at your past 12 months SLA compliance and tell you that SLA violations are most common with high priority incidents, or it's most common when the category is equal to administration. Stuff like that, that's not really in your screen, and stuff that will take a little bit of digging deeper for you to understand that particular aspect. So those are things that ZI Insights can directly pull from the reports that you generate. So it can do the creation as well as interpretation, and we use AI in these areas today. The next question that I have is, my application is not supported out of the box. How can I import data and blend it? That's a very valid question. We are continuously trying to add new or support new IT tools in our out of the box integrations, but it does take time. And you might find that your application might not be listed. In such situations, there are a couple of ways you can import data into the application. One is through APIs. If your application has data APIs which can export data when those APIs are used, we can use that and use those APIs to fetch data into Analytics Plus. And the second way is to directly connect Analytics Plus to your application's database. Analytics Plus offers out-of-the-box integration with databases like MySQL, MS SQL, Sybase, etc. And you can use Analytics Plus to connect to those databases and pull in tables directly or run custom queries, which will give you the result that you're looking for. Right. So those are two ways that you can pull data using Analytics Plus from tools that we don't support out of the box yet. Right. So those are all. That is all the time that I have for taking questions. We're almost hitting our ceiling of time limit. So the questions that I was not able to answer during the session, I'll reach out to you via email and ensure that your question is answered. And all of you who joined today will receive a recording of this webinar, and you can use it for future reference. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to write to me. This is my email address, and I'll be more than happy to assist you with anything that you require with regards to Analytics Plus. So having said that, thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure hosting this webinar, and I hope you guys found it useful. And I'll meet you again in another webinar really soon. Thank you so much. Bye.